Yeah, we're live.
Okay,
Ya
thank you.
estamos.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome, all our participants and our panelists to this Rule of Law panel and award presentation. It's the IAVA LexisNexis Rule of Law Award that we are introducing today or presenting today to Texas Civil Rights Projects represented by Mimi Marciani. I would like to start, thanking everyone for participating in this event and thanking LexisNexis for their long-standing support and partnership with the Inter-American Bar Association, represented by Ian McDougall. Ian is the legal vice president of LexisNexis, the general counsel and executive vice president of LexisNexis. He's also the president of the LexisNexis Legal and Professional Division of the RELS Group. And Ian is also president of the LexisNexis Rule of Law Award Foundation, a nonprofit charitable organization established to advance the rule of law. Ian McDougall really has a long standing working and supporting rule of law initiatives with many organizations. And he had joined LexisNexis in 2004 as vice president and legal director for LexisNexis International, where he oversaw the legal function for the group, including regulatory compliance, commercial agreements, IT, intellectual property, and litigation. He's been also involved in business strategy and acquisitions and general business planning. At LexisNexis, Mr. McDougall has stepped into varying roles and different roles, including interim, HR director for LNI and interim managing director for LexisNexis New Zealand. He really has an extensive background, and we are really glad to have him here, an honor to have him here as a panelist. This program, I like to mention, has sort of two parts of it. One would be a rule of law panel where Ian will present, and the other one, and the other panelist for that rule of law panel will be Mimi Marciani, talking about their organization and the work that they do. Also, I just wanted to say why this is important for the Inter-American Bar Association. Our mission is to promote the rule of law. Our mission is to promote democratic institutions. And we've been working, the IABA has 80 years of existence working on that area. Our mission is also to connect bar associations from other countries. We actually were born as an institutional membership organization, and then it opened to individual membership. So we've been working long on that, but there's a lot of work to do. And why is this so important? Is because this really promotes development. So one thing that I would like to share with all our audience is the fact that we have joined the Law Societies Compact and Forum for SDG 16, which is an initiative for a partnership among law societies from all around the world, and it's been hosted by the World Bank. So the idea is basically, to support the achievement of SDG 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. So that's part of what commit us to this work. And we would like to continue our work with the support of our partners. And in this regard, LexisNexis has been a very strong, and long-standing loyal partner to the IAVA, and we look forward to continue with that partnership and even broaden the lines of cooperation that we could have. Thank you very much, Gian, again, on my behalf and on behalf of the Inter-American Bar Association. I'm glad to announce that we have our president, Roberto Flores. We apologize, there were some technical difficulties, but he's here with us. And hopefully our Vice President, Jed Kessler, will also join us, and then I will continue introducing Mimi and starting the panel. Thank you. Buenas tardes, Roberto.
Silenciar, ya.
Gracias.
¿Me escuchas?
Sí.
Ok. ¿Qué debo hacer? Estoy a las órdenes.
Justo llegaste a tiempo, porque estaba haciendo las introducciones y venían las palabras del presidente de la FIA.
Ok. Ya están los vicepresidentes y el otro de LexisNexis. En español no hay problema.
Sí, en español tenemos a las intérpretes.
Ok. Estoy muy agradecido con LexisNexis por este tipo de premios que acostumbra dar anualmente. La verdad es que el luchar por el Estado de Derecho, como lo hace este organismo, que es uno de nuestros principales partnerships, nos da mucho gusto, porque no solamente lo hacen en América, sino que lo hacen en diferentes partes del mundo. Todo esto ayuda a que el Estado de Derecho se dé en forma correcta y ordenada, se respeten los derechos humanos a través del Estado de Derecho y puedan hacer la convivencia de los seres humanos más agradable. De esta forma, seguiremos también nosotros cooperando como la Inter-American Bar Association, Federación Interamericana de Abogados, FIA, en todo lo que podamos compartir y convivir para luchar en forma unida por el Estado de Derecho. Thank you very much. Gracias, Lourdes.
Gracias, Roberto. Seguidamente quisiera dar la palabra a nuestro vicepresidente, Jed Kessler, primer vicepresidente, para ser precisos. Thank you, Jed.
Thank you, Lourdes. I'm going to speak in English.
That's good.
We are excited to have the partnership with LexisNexis. The FIA is just about to expand itself in major ways. We're forming a network with law professors all over the hemisphere. We have a professor from Columbia University who's going to speak at our closing ceremony, and that's going to be the beginning of a network with law professors all over the hemisphere. We're also joining forces with chambers of commerce and industrial groups in the hopes that by allying with people like them, we can not only provide our legal skills, but we can actually help to change legislation and improve all sorts of human rights and rule of law issues that are hurting in many ways. One of the important ones is the excessive protection of immunity of government officials in the hemisphere. That's one of the ones that I especially think is important. But there are many more. Violence. I do appreciate the opportunity to partner with you, and I look forward very much to being involved over the next year or so. Thank you.
Gracias, Jad. Les voy a pedir a todos que mantengan sus micros apagados cuando no estén hablando para contribuir al desarrollo de la sesión. Muchas gracias, Jad. Es realmente importante lo que remarcas, y en esos partnerships estamos trabajando desde la FIA, y el Compact and Forum que mencionamos también va a trabajar algunos proyectos ya que se acaban de aprobar, que son proyectos relativos al acceso a la justicia. Entonces, no quería dejar de mencionar ese tema. Y parte del trabajo que que ha realizado y realiza Texas Civil Rights Project es también trabajo relativo al acceso a la justicia. Así que creo que en el transcurso del panel van a poder, digamos, tener la dimensión del trabajo de Rule of Law que hace LexisNexis y de apoyo al Estado de Derecho o imperio de la ley, como sabemos que Ian le gusta llamarlo y prefiere llamarlo. Entonces, y también van a conocer el trabajo de Texas Civil Rights Projects. Ya habíamos hecho la presentación de Ian McDougall. Quisiera presentar a Mimi Marciani y darles la palabra seguidamente. Mimi Marciani has extensive background in civil rights advocacy and nonprofit management, as well as expertise in election law. Mrs. Marciani previously directed voting rights programs for multiple political campaigns and committees, all overseeing compliance with election law, which is at the core of democracy. That's a parenthesis added. In 2014, Mrs. Marciani led the first coordinated statewide voter protection program for progressive in Texas. And before moving to Texas, Mrs. Marciani spent several years as consul for the democracy program of the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law, where she litigated different cases before the Supreme Court. Mrs. Marciani teaches election law and policy at the University of Texas School of Law and serves on the NYU Board of Trustees. Mrs. Marciani has also taught constitutional law at NYU's Wagner School of Public Policy and NYU's campus in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. Mrs. Marciani graduated cum laude from New York University, NYU School of Law, and received a VA magna cum laude from Vanderbilt University. Well, it's our pleasure to present Mimi Marciani representing Texas Civil Rights Projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I have to say, it is such an extraordinary honor to be here with you today, and on behalf of the Texas Civil Rights Project, to accept the Inter-American Bar Association LexisNexis Rule of Law Award. As you might have heard, we've actually had quite a week down here in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And
sorry, thank you. I apologize for not being clear. I was introducing both panelists, and I was going to give, in the order of the program that I share with all of you, give Ian McDougall the floor to speak, and then continue with you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so my comments are about the award. Yeah, this is the first thing, and then we'll talk about more broadly rule of law a bit later. Is that correct?
Oh, we can do it that way too. We were going to do the rule of law panel first, and then the presentation of the award. But we can do it either way.
Okay.
We're flexible here.
I'm ready to do either. What would you prefer me to do?
Let's go with the panel.
Okay.
And we close with the award ceremony. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, then I'll start now. I'll just speak for about 10 minutes, if that's okay. That's what I prepared to do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I've only got a short time, 10 minutes, for a subject that I often talk about in a lecture series. So much detail is going to be left out here. I just want to make that clear. I want to talk today about the importance of the rule of law in current circumstances. Now, we, the lawyers, came into the legal profession for many reasons. Money, an interesting subject. We're argumentative and opinionated, and that suits us. Very often our parents were lawyers. A sense of justice, wanting to do the right thing. But remember, not everyone has been trained to think the way lawyers think. Questions like, so why do we need contracts anyway? Or what is a legal entity? Are questions lawyers might think are ridiculous, but they're not. What they do is they show the gap between the way lawyers think and the way others think. People who ask such questions are not being stupid, they're expressing that sometimes the language of the law is not the language most people speak. And I'll come back to that point a little later. First, I wanted to deal with a couple of very difficult subjects that have been in the news recently, because they're illustrative, I think, of debates about the rule of law and how it gets mentioned. The controversy in the United States over its election has produced a huge amount of media reporting, and the rule of law is often mentioned. And on that issue, I want to separate the intensity of the political arguments, upon which I make no comment at all, the recent violent actions on Capitol Hill, which everyone should condemn without reservation, and I want to separate them from the basic. From the perspective of the LexisNexis definition of the rule of law, one aspect has continued to shine brightly through the election controversy: the independence of the judiciary. Time and again, in literally dozens of court cases, the arguments of both sides revolved around the law and evidence. All parties to the cases abided by the outcome of judicial process. Appeals were heard and decided. Access to the courts was provided time and again. Now, whether you disagree with what the court says or not, nobody can say that the decisions of the court have not been. Whether you disagree with the outcome of the election or not, whether one party or the other accepts the results or not, nobody can claim that the process prescribed in law have not been followed. That is the rule of law situation as I see it, stripped of all of the surrounding issues. Now, violence is never a good way to solve problems. But fortunately, what we saw was a transition of power, the Constitution was followed, and a new president is in power. Now, also in the news was a fascinating case concerning a Uruguayan soccer player, Edinson Cavani, in the UK, who posted a tweet which was alleged to be racist. The interesting point to come out of this is what has been argued to be a clash of cultures. To recap, as I understand it, a friend or a fan, I'm not sure, of the soccer player sent him a message of congratulation on a recent performance. Cavani replied with the words, "Gracias, negrito." The strict and literal translation of that word is little black. In this use, it's claimed that the way little is often intended to be affectionate. As a result of using those words, he was fined £100,000 by the English Football Association and banned for a number of games for racist language. Interestingly, and here's where the alleged culture clash comes in, now this punishment produced an angry response from his Uruguayan teammates who claimed, and I will quote, "The sanction shows the English Football Association biased, dogmatic and ethnocentric vision that only allows a subjective interpretation to be made from its particular and excluding conclusion, however flawed it may be." Edinson Cavani has never committed any conduct that could be interpreted as racist. He merely used a common expression in Latin America to affectionately address a loved one or close friend. They go on to say, to sustain that the only way to obtain a valid interpretation in life is the way which lies in the minds of the managers of the English Football Association is actually a true discriminatory act, which is completely reprehensible and against Uruguayan culture. Now, I've canvassed a number of Spanish native speakers and people familiar with the culture, and the issue doesn't appear to be as straightforward as that letter makes out. The answers I received seemed completely split down the middle. Some were saying it isn't taken as being offensive in Latin America, and some saying that it is offensive. Now, the translation into English, or French for that matter, is not straightforward. I've seen multiple attempts to translate it into English. Either way, there's no translation I've seen that sounds acceptable, frankly, regardless of context, to a native English speaker. This interesting question is one that touches upon the LexisNexis definition of the rule of law because of the way in which we came to it. We surveyed the history of the rule of law around the world and introduced a definition that could be applied in all countries, in all societies, and in all political systems. That, we believe, is the best way to deliver the advantages of the rule of law to the 5 billion people the United Nations estimates still remain outside its protection. So let's remind ourselves what we're talking about. The Lexis definition of the rule of law is 4 parts: equality under the law, an independent judiciary free from corruption or political interference, published and accessible laws, and access to remedy to get your grievance resolved. Ultimately, the Cavani case comes down to whether you accept that using that type of language can be culturally affectionate, as Cavani and supporters claim, or whether there is no moral relativism here. Reference to ethnicity, whether giving thanks affectionately or not, is wrong, even if accepted by some cultures. My view is that because something is accepted by some, that doesn't make it right. An important aspect of the rule of law is equality before the law. That means everyone being treated equally, regardless of what position in society you hold, whatever your race, religion, ethnicity, sex, or any other attribute. Unfortunately, what we have seen and what we often see is that the language of racial epithets, even if accepted in society, simply perpetuates division and discrimination. As we saw in the US recently, the language of influencers matters and can have enormous effect. Ultimately, there are some fundamental issues which are not defensible simply because they are accepted norms in some cultures. Equality is a fundamental human right that is traceable across all cultures. Language which perpetuates the division of people, and as I mentioned before, the division of people usually leads to conflict or abuse and the perpetuation of inequality. Such language of division surely cannot be right under any circumstances. So let's remind ourselves and the world why the rule of law is important. It is historically the way that all societies have learned results in fairness. From Hammurabi's Code, through Arabic scholarship, through Upanishad in India, and Magna Carta. This shows us the rule of law belongs to no single culture or society. It protects the innocent from abuse, whether by the state or any other powerful actor. It rewards us all economically. Strong rule of law equals prosperous societies. These are all facts. But when society experiences problems, often economic, but not necessarily only economic, sometimes people emerge who offer simple solutions, point the finger of blame at parts of society, or most often foreigners, and encourage people to think that they have all the answers. Such people almost always advocate a path that leads away from the rule of law, towards oppression, violence, collapse of society, and even worse conditions for their supporters. But desperate times lead people to desperate solutions. It's even harder when, as I mentioned at the start of this talk, people can't easily make the connection between the rule of law and their own self-interests, the language of lawyers and the language of ordinary people. So the importance of my message is that we must all, as a legal profession, double our efforts to explain the rule of law and, more importantly, why it's important to everyone, no matter what your political persuasion. We must explain that only long-term commitment to the rule of law will solve the very issue that drive people into the hands of populists. Sometimes it seems like one step forward and 2 steps back. Just look at the situation in Myanmar. But I think the story of the world shows us the inexorable path of history is the journey towards increasing the rule of law, even if sometimes the darkness seems to return. So I call on the IABA's support for a LexisNexis initiative to convene a Ministers of Justice of the Americas conference to reinvigorate high-level support for the rule of law. And finally, I ask for the IABA's support to re-energize efforts to educate everyone about the crucial importance of the rule of law. Let us become populists for the rule of law. It is the only hope for a prosperous society, and everyone has to know it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ian. Great words, and never cease to amaze us with your presentations. And I'm happy to say that, with the endorsement of our president and vice president, that we will be very happy to support the, your request in terms of convening the ministers of justice, and also happy to say that we are working on designing a project on rule of law and sustainability. It started with the idea of an environmental project, which one of our members was, supporting us. We were very interested in the issue of environment too, but we decided to sort of, it's the evolution of the dialectic, I guess helps you to that, the evolution of the project from one of, sustainable development in terms of focus on the environment to one of rule of law and sustainability. So happy to talk more about that. That's great. One thing that your presentation actually brings to mind is some concept, some word that a dear professor of legal anthropology shared with us. And not only he shared the concept in class, we were able to have a conversation about what that concept means really. And it's ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism. And one thing is understanding the word or the meaning of the word of ethnocentrism by the dictionary definition. And another thing is having the insight of what ethnocentrism means. And it's a very interesting debate and point. I have to share, to be, candid and transparent. My adored aunt used to call my adored mother negrita de cariño. So, and the ito or ita in Spanish means an endearment, you refer like that. So it's a very controversial thing, and I can see both sides of the equation, which is a very difficult thing sometimes when you see both sides and the arguments of both sides of the debate, because typically people want you to be in one corner or the other. But it's a very interesting topic, and it's very important to consider and think as lawyers about this concept of ethnocentrism and what it really means, and to find ways that we can really find common grounds moving toward a better world and a better global order and global understanding with respect to other cultures, but also to respect to the important and fundamental universal paradigms or principles. So without more on my side, I'd like to, give the floor to Mimi Marciani to continue with our program. Thank you, Mimi.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you again. Gosh, Ian, that got me thinking. I mean, I will tell you, if you're interested in the combination of politics, race, democracy, the rule of law, and a bit of just cultural chaos sprinkled on top, Texas is a good place for you to be. And so I'm really delighted this morning or this afternoon to share a little bit about the Texas Civil Rights Project and the work that we do to try to promote the rule of law here in Texas. As I started to say before, many thanks to the organizers of this event, to Lourdes and other people. This has been quite a week in Texas, which is saying a lot given the normal chaos of life in Texas. As people might have heard, we've had an extreme weather event that left millions without power, including my own family, and without drinking water, including my own family right now. So it has been a little chaotic, and I will tell you, very pleased that I was able to join you today, because it was touch and go for a little bit with our power coming in and on. So I want to talk a little bit more about the Texas Civil Rights Project and how we use the power of litigation and other forms of legal advocacy to hold government officials accountable to the law and to enforce the civil rights of the people of Texas. And I'm gonna give you a lot of examples from our work, and then I'll circle back around and make some broader points. But it's funny, Ian and I did not coordinate our remarks before today, but I think that you'll be interested to see how many ways they dovetail. So just about the Texas Civil Rights Project. So we employ a unique community lawyering model. And our aim in many ways, and I was actually delighted to hear Ian reference this, is to bring the power of the law to everyday people in Texas. And not just to make sure that they have the ability to hold government officials accountable, but also that they understand their rights and that they are empowered by that understanding. So let me tell you a little bit about what this looks like in practice. So when I say we have a unique community lawyering model, what that looks like is our attorneys build and maintain a symbiotic relationship with grassroots organizations and community leaders across our state and also across our country and at times across our borders as well. And these relationships, these really deeply rooted community relationships, allow us to quickly identify and more deeply understand the barriers to justice and equality at the community level. As Ian's remarks referenced, it can be complicated when you get into some of the nuances of, particularly current controversies. And it is important to us that we have these community relationships so that we can develop that nuanced relationship and so that we can be the go-to lawyers, particularly for groups of Texans whose rights have historically been abused. And so in practice, this means that we work with a wide coalition of both legal organizations, and we've been really proud over the years, and I'll talk a little bit about this, to work with the American Bar Association and others, but also community organizations across Texas. And ultimately, we seek to provide legal and policy muscle in Texas to support collective efforts towards reform. Hold on one second. Sorry, the joys of working from home.
No
That's
problem.
adorable. Having a kid.
So at the Texas Civil Rights Project, we organize our work into 3 buckets: righting the injustices of the criminal legal system, advancing voting rights and expanding participation, and then demanding human dignity for immigrant families and protecting the rights of our border community. And even though that's the way that we structure our work, as I was preparing for today's ceremony, it struck me that our work has such a natural intersection with the 4 pillars that this rule of law award and that LexisNexis and the Inter-American Bar Association have been seeking to advance. So if you'll indulge me a little bit longer, I wanted to give you some examples from our work and how the lawyers of the Texas Civil Rights Project actually advance these pillars on the ground. So first was transparency of the law. In 2018, as many of you, if not all of you, are aware, the Trump administration implemented something called the zero tolerance policy, a new policy of criminally prosecuting migrant families coming into the United States from Central America who were trying to seek asylum. And in the process of the criminal prosecution, the Trump administration was actually separating children from their parents. The parents were being put into the United States criminal legal system. The children were being put into child protective services, but under the umbrella of our immigration agents. And this policy was put into effect first and foremost at the southern border between Texas and Mexico. And the lawyers at the Texas Civil Rights Project were some of the very first in the country, if not the first, to actually recognize, because of those community relationships I spoke about earlier, that the reason that judges, public defenders, prosecutors were showing up at court and seeing dozens of parents separated from their children was because of the implementation of this zero tolerance policy. And so one of the things we do, we took a triage approach that included litigation. But one of the things we did is started going to criminal court every single morning and actually collecting data on the separated families. And in fact, it is my belief that we were, for a time, the only non-governmental agency, and perhaps, given the chaos of the Trump administration, the only agency that was actually collecting information about these separated families. We share this information with the press, with legal organizations like the Bar Association, quite frankly, with government officials across the world. And by doing so, we're able to shine a bright light on the human rights violations being perpetuated under the guise of that policy. Lots more one could say about that issue, but what I wanted to really underscore is why it was so important that we had folks on the ground and that we were able to actually bring transparency to the practices of the Trump administration. It's actually our understanding that the Trump administration had rolled out this zero tolerance policy in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, in part because they believed that this would go undetected, at least for some period of time. Of course, after global uproar, the Trump administration wound back this policy, and indeed, still today, the Biden administration is seeking to reunite all of the families. Second pillar is equal protection under the law. This is a massive part of what the Texas Civil Rights Project does day in and day out. And one example I wanted to share with you is a recent court victory that we won just a couple months ago in Texas. This was a lawsuit that we had actually been litigating for 4 years against the Texas state government. The state of Texas was refusing to adhere by a 1993 law that requires voter registration when people update their driver's license. Now, this is going to sound very peculiar to folks not in the United States because of the peculiar facets of our democratic structure. But in the United States, in order to vote successfully, you have to be registered in advance, meaning that voter registration has become a very critical part of that process. And the rules around voter registration can mean the difference between somebody being enfranchised or cut out of the system. Well, Texas was refusing to enforce this law when it came to online transactions. And this actually meant, and this got worse during the pandemic when everything moved online, that close to 2 million people every year in Texas were updating their driver's license, but the ones that were doing it online were not getting the opportunity to register to vote. And this had particular implications for younger Texans and for poorer Texans who are more likely to move. Ultimately, we won our case in court, in part under arguments based in the equal protection of the law. And we were really proud to be able to extend the ability to register to vote to folks who were interacting with this government agency online in addition to in person. So another example I'll give you, access to a legal remedy. Another project the Texas Civil Rights Project has undertaken in the last couple of years is to help to educate members of the South Texas community, landowners, about their rights when their land fell in the proposed path of the border, the border wall between the United States and Mexico. And this was incredibly important because, in fact, many landowners did not understand that in our US Constitution, they actually have a right to just compensation if the government's going to take their property for, in this case, the purported need was national security. And so the Texas Civil Rights Project undertook a massive campaign to reach out to hundreds of landowners along the Texas-Mexico border, many of whom have had this family in their land for generations. One of our clients, their family was actually deeded the land from Spain. So you can do a little, if you think about your history, it's been quite a long time since Texas was a Spanish territory. So they have had that land in the family for a long time. And I'm proud to say that the Texas Civil Rights Project was able to educate landowners. We have been representing several families ourselves. We've also placed landowners with other attorneys. and made sure that these landowners had access to their constitutional rights when the Trump administration was seeking to take their land to build this border wall. Finally, independent judiciaries, and this goes back to something Ian said. Litigation is not our only tool at the Texas Civil Rights Project, but it's one of our sharpest weapons against government officials with considerable power. And it is one of our most potent defenses against overreach and the trampling of civil rights. And we have seen, I agree with Ian that we have seen time and again how federal courts in particular, who are of course in the United States protected from political forces through lifetime tenure, have been willing to make unpopular rulings in Texas in favor of civil rights. And I do agree with Ian that an independent judiciary underpins our ability to enforce the rule of law. And without it, it would be much more difficult, if not impossible, to protect minorities, whether those are racial minorities, religious minorities, political minorities, from the kind of brute force that can happen when a majority comes together. And so that has been absolutely instrumental. And so the just last thing I will say is, as my bio demonstrated, my particular area of expertise is in the law of democracy and American election law. As for the reasons Ian noted, I had quite a busy fall. And, I will say that I have been thinking a lot lately about the demise of democracies and why that happens, and the factors that have to exist for a democracy to no longer be functional. And I personally do not believe that just because, for instance, the United States has had a strong democracy for decades, I don't believe that means that we will inevitably have a strong democracy for decades. And, at the end of the day, it is my belief that the rule of law is what underpins, at a fundamental level, our democracy, our United States way of government, our United States way of life. And I agree with Ian that it is hard to conceive of something else that is more important in this moment of extraordinary social and cultural unrest in the United States and across the world than for the legal profession to make sure that, regardless of our own political views, that we are rallying behind the rule of law and the importance of impartial, independent judiciaries to enforce it. And so for all of those reasons, I am really honored and delighted to be here today, and in just a couple of moments to accept this award from LexisNexis and the Inter-American Bar Association on behalf of the Texas Civil Rights Project.
Thank you, Mimi. You both definitely great presentations. They complement each other very well, because that's what it is really the work of making rule of law not just an abstract concept, but actually materialize what that means in terms of, helping communities to access justice, or doing work that support solid democratic institutions. At the end, the electoral system is at the core of democracy. It's not the only element. We shouldn't confuse, electoral process with democratic governance, because they are related. One is indispensable for the other, but it's no warranty of it. So, having elections definitely is at the core, and free and fair elections and allowing everyone to exercise the right to vote is at the core of democratic systems. It's not the end of it, it's the beginning of it. So it's a very important work also in terms of helping people, or landowners, to know the rights and being able to really defend them and get the proper legal remedies. It's an excellent job. And I have to say, had opportunity briefly, to see the work they did also supporting asylum seekers. Asylum has been, part of the international legal framework, for a long time. And it's very important, the work that you do in terms of asylum seekers and, and supporting immigrants too. So we do note of that work. Jed Kessler is raising his hand. Is my idea? Oh no, okay, sorry, it was a different thing. I wanted to ask Ian if he could add then, if Jed is not raising the hand, I would like Ian if he could add something to the comment that Mimi had said about their work and everything, because we do know, rule of law is not just the concept. It needs to, and it's not something that we can take for granted like democracy. We need to work for it and work hard and smart every day if we want to, secure through that, peace, security, human rights, development. And Ian made a really great point in his presentation like last year that I'd like to highlight, which was that it was not only the right way, the right thing to do, in different words probably, but it also good for development and good for the economy. Ian.
Yeah, I would just emphasize the point you've made. One thing that we've tried to do with regard to the what we call the Business for the Rule of Law campaign that we try to initiate amongst the business community is actually to sort of connect it to something I said about people generally, and that is to try to unashamedly connect the rule of law to self-interest. We've shown through statistical analysis that the rule of law is beneficial. It increases all kinds of socioeconomic measures like per capita GDP, like mortality rates, all kinds of things. So we have to make this clear to everybody, that it's not only the right thing to do, but it can directly affect your prosperity in meaningful ways. And this is kind of part of what I'm talking about, making the connection to everybody's lives. And instead of them feeling that this is something that just lawyers talk about, that this is something that's important to everybody.
Thank you, Ian. I just wanted to thank both of you and transition to the next part of the program, which is the ceremony. Ian and Roberto will say a few words while I'm going to do a sort of symbolic virtual presentation of the award by sharing it on the picture while they presented, Ian and Roberto. And if Roberto, for any reason, could not be connected, Jad will do the honors. But I'm going to share now on the screen the award, the Rule of Law Award, and then we're going to continue with the ceremony after your words. We will give words to Mimi, and she will present the actual award. Let me see, I need to have the picture here.
So would you like me to say a few words now?
Yes, I'm going. Yes, you can start sharing a few words.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to say a few words here as we honour the recipient who's with us of the IABA LexisNexis Rule of Law Award. I speak a lot about. That's completely transformed my screen there. Yeah, you've heard me talk about the rule of law, but I wanted to emphasize the importance that we give to supporting these prestigious awards, and why in 2018, I think it was, we approached the IABA to jointly establish this Rule of Law Award. Advancing the rule of law around the world is our fundamental purpose as a company. And as I've mentioned before, the rule of law is increasingly under threat, seemingly like never before. Unfortunately, it seems each year when I say a few words at awards presentations that we do, my words have been ones of increasing alarm, not decreasing alarm. And the last year presented even greater challenges. So, from time to time, every nation has an emergency of one kind or another to face. It tests all aspects of that nation, the people, the facilities, the finances, and occasionally it tests the commitment to the rule of law. And as I've said many times, the rule of law is the crucial building block for any society to be stable and prosper. Without the rule of law, there's no prosperity. The vulnerable in society are left behind or oppressed. Without the rule of law, a nation's prosperity declines. Human rights are abandoned. The social order eventually breaks down. This is as inevitable a consequence of the lack of the rule of law as is the certainty the sun will rise tomorrow. It's not just a nice to have, it's an absolute necessity. Protecting the rule of law from various threats, both the absence of democracy and the abuse of democracy, from those who restrict the independence of the judiciary, access to remedy, abuse basic human rights. It's a fight we must win. And we all need to take a stand and follow the examples of today's outstanding honoree. The Texas Civil Rights Project and their allies did amazing work last year, as you've just been hearing, in battling voter suppression, taking down barriers to participation in the elections. In particular, the election protection campaign helped mobilize, I understand, close to 100 organizations and businesses to educate voters about their rights. Deployed, I believe, or correct me if I'm wrong, 4,000 legal and field volunteers to monitor the polls during the election cycle and pushed counties to address election issues affecting voters in real time through, as you've heard, litigation and other advocacy. I understand in partnership with other organizations, you addressed more than 10,000 voting issues during the period, helping tens of thousands of Texans cast ballots that count and forced enduring systemic change in several large counties. As with each of the illustrious previous winners over the years, today's honoree, Texas Civil Rights Project, has that passion and courage to make a difference, to advance the rule of law and change the world for the better. For the award, I congratulate you, and for your commitment, I thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ian, y en verdad hacemos todas sus palabras y efectivamente los felicitamos y les agradecemos. Queremos dar las palabras a nuestro presidente, Roberto Flores, también unas pequeñas palabras sobre el premio.
Bueno, pues como mencionábamos hace un momento, este premio tiene un valor muy importante porque motiva en forma individual cuando lo gana una sola persona o una institución que lucha permanentemente por los derechos humanos, por el Estado de Derecho primordialmente, y todo esto es una invitación de parte de LexisNexis a seguir trabajando sobre este tipo de actividades que mucho benefician a la sociedad. En la medida en que se pueda dar este tipo de premios, de reconocimientos, en esa medida las instituciones y las personas individuales que lo reciben se afanan y se preocupan más por hacer las cosas no solamente bien, sino excelentes. Gracias. Gracias, Lourdes.
Gracias, Roberto. Ahora hemos hecho, digamos, la entrega simbólica del premio a Texas Civil Rights Project, excelentemente representado por Mimi Marciani. Ahora Mimi va a mostrarnos el premio y decir unas palabras. Gracias.
Yes, thank you so much. And so you guys, you can see it right here.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Roberto, I wanted to just pick up on something you said. The people, myself included, and the people who work at the Texas Civil Rights Project, the 40 people we have on staff, as Ian noted, the thousands and thousands of volunteers we have across Texas doing all of this work, from protecting the election to representing landowners to helping asylum seekers in the southern border to fighting for the rights of people who are incarcerated and in very difficult conditions exactly right now in Texas. The people doing this work across Texas, we are motivated by our belief in the rule of law and the responsibility we feel as lawyers to use our power to make the world a better place. At the same time, it is difficult work. As I've told my staff many times in the last year, 2020 was a particularly difficult year to do very difficult work. And I will say that having a recognition of this importance means a tremendous amount to me and our staff and our board and all of our volunteers. And so it really, it does, I think, have the motivating factor that Roberto spoke of. I think that is a very real thing. And I am delighted that this body comes together to give this award. And you should also know, so of course, because of the ongoing pandemic, our operations have been remote now for almost a year, but because you were kind enough to send this to my home, I was able to display the award to our entire staff via a Zoom call at a recent staff meeting, and have assured everybody that as soon as we're back in the office, it will be on prominent display and everybody will be able to see it in person. So again, thank you to all of you. We are incredibly honored. And I know I say that on behalf of our entire staff and board and volunteers. And I do really commend this group for everything you're doing to not just advance the rule of law, but then also recognize groups like ours that are doing what we can day in and day out.
Thank you. Thank you, Mimi. And I would be remiss if I don't mention, expressly thank Ian McDougall and also Nigel Roberts, who've been super supportive and helpful through all this time, and to make this program also come to terms, as nicely as it has come. I want to apologize to our audience. There were a few questions there, but I don't think the time is going to allow us to go there. But we will, try to follow up with that. Thank you very much, Ian. Nigel, and again, as usual, Roberto, our president, and Jad Kessler, our first vice president, and to all the IAVA team and volunteers.